Look, our role is to help big, important organizations take advantage of change, both for their competitive advantage and to create, sustained positive impact in the world. And the IOC is one example of literally tens of thousands that get me excited.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work, episode 306. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Our community is growing. We're now over 1 million loyal listeners. And to help you engage with each other, we recently launched where we share weekly insights and some good stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor. To subscribe to that newsletter, go to aiandwork.beehive.com/subscribe. That's Beehive with 2 E's and 2 I's. The newsletter's free and not at all spammy. We will never share your details. And of course, we'll share that link in the show notes. If you like what we do, please tell a friend and give us a like and a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you leave a comment, I may share it in an upcoming episode. Like this one from Cameron in the Czech Republic, who says he listens while commuting on the train to Prague. Cameron's favorite episode is the one with Babak Hojat, CTO of AI at Cognizant, and famously the co-inventor of Siri. Cameron, that's also one of my favorites. Babak is a national hero. Glad you enjoyed it. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show, and of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact. Eric Hollenbeck writes in Washington State University Insider that using the term artificial intelligence in product descriptions actually reduces purchase intentions. Hollenbeck summarizes findings from recent academic research that confirms products described as using AI are less popular. The researchers conclude it's because when AI is mentioned, it lowers emotional trust, which decreases purchase intentions. The researchers showed consumers different ads for products, including televisions and financial services. The only difference is that sometimes the ads included the term AI. Turns out consumers were less likely to buy when the product described their AI features. Of course, we will link to that full article in the show notes. Now shifting to today's conversation. Dan Helfrich is chair and CEO of Deloitte Consulting, where he leads a team of more than 80,000 professionals. Dan frequently shares insights on issues, including the evolving nature of the consulting profession, the future of work, and inclusive leadership. Prior to Dan's current role, he led Deloitte's government and public services team. Dan's an active alum of Georgetown University, go Hoyas, where he holds a Bachelor of Science and an MBA. Dan's also famously the play-by-play announcer for the Hoyas men's soccer team. When he's not inspiring clients, you can find him cheering on some very talented kids of his from the sidelines of a soccer pitch. And without further ado, Dan, it's my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about that illustrious background and how you got into this space.
Double Dan podcast is dangerous territory, so fun to be with you and fun to be part of the million-person and growing community. I'm in my 6th year leading, or as I like to say, captaining this Deloitte Consulting team, and it's such a fun time at the intersection of change and big enterprises, which is where I spend most of my time. And you got a lot of clients in a lot of different industries grappling with all these forces of change, whether those are geopolitical or a rapidly changing economic environment or a rapidly changing technology environment that includes AI. It's a really fun time.
You're talking to an audience of technologists and AI enthusiasts, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say a lot of them don't really understand what Deloitte and Deloitte Consulting do. I've heard you talk online a lot about some of the transformative projects that your team has owned. Could you take one of them that makes you most proud and just describe what a day in the life is like and what kinds of projects you and the team do?
Of course, Dan, the thing all consultants like to say is it depends. And part of that reason is because the environments change really quickly. And what great consultants do is they change the way they approach things, they change their business model, and they change the topics on which they are consulting based on the fact that the world is changing. And so that certainly is the case for us. Look, maybe I'll pick one that hits close to home for people around the world who watched this summer, the Olympics, because, Deloitte has viewed that improving the Olympic experience, and in particular the fan experience, is a huge opportunity. And that if that's done in a purposeful, intentional way, that the Olympics, which stand for so much beauty and power in integration, that those can create a better, more interconnected fan experience. And we became the sort of the worldwide digital transformation partner of the International Olympic Committee. And we've been doing a ton of stuff to reimagine the intersection of fans and the data about those fans to see if we can ignite more connection within the Olympic movement, not just in the 16 days of glory as they're known when the actual competition happens, but throughout the experience 365 days a year. And so, look, our role is to help big, important organizations take advantage of change, both for their competitive advantage and to create, sustained positive impact in the world. And the IOC is one example of literally tens of thousands that get me excited.
I've heard you talk a lot about the importance of agility for leaders in 2025 and beyond. Who are some of the leaders that inspire you?
I do a lot of listening. I do a lot of active learning by reading and by watching. And so I'm in many ways this composite of thousands of leaders that I've personally observed. And as I like to say, Dan, I consider myself a leader in training. I'll give you two specific leaders. One actually is a family member who's a leader I admire with his agility, and another is a conventional big enterprise leader. The big enterprise leader is John Geller, who's the CEO and president at Marriott Vacations Worldwide. And Marriott Vacations has had this really interesting journey over the last many years, and it is profound change. Doubling its size based on a bunch of M&A, and really changing the underlying business model. And in doing so, you have this rapidly growing business that's really quickly developing a patchwork of disjointed platforms and systems. And that was clouding and frankly detracting from growth opportunities for Marriott Vacations. Then you throw COVID on top of that. And while COVID obviously forced many organizations into an operational deep freeze, Geller's group, supported by our team at Deloitte, saw a linkage between the pandemic shutdown and what they experienced in terms of this M&A overwhelm. And that was this need for change. And so instead of battening down the hatches and weathering the storm, the Marriott Vacations team and Geller said, let's rethink and retool the entire organization for the future. And then suddenly their transformation over the last 3 years is incredible. And the impact on not only their customers, but on key people like their agents at the core of their customer experience, going from 9 or 10 different systems that an agent had to deal with in order to help one of their owners or customers, to a single one, incredibly powerful. And so the agility, even in moments of disruption, that the Marriott Vacations team has used, super impressive to me. But the more personal one is my brother Brian. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. My brother Brian is the CEO of a small Southeast based in Charlotte coffee chain called Summit Coffee, and a combination of retail and wholesaling coffee. Started as one shop. And look, during COVID, you're a tiny business selling coffee in a retail environment. Guess what? Things look really bleak. And instead of seeing the bleakness, Brian and his team got creative. And there was a and this story's been well reported, but there was an old bank, a drive-through bank that had been vacant for a decade. And they saw it and said, what if we turn this into a drive-through coffee and donut shop that would allow social distancing to happen? And suddenly, in about a 10-day period, they dusted literally the cobwebs off of this old bank, and suddenly you have thousands of people a day getting coffee and donuts in a drive-through. That, to me, is agility, and we need leaders who are far more comfortable being creative and changing their mind versus following a script.
Dan, we don't do ad reads on this podcast, but you know what? Here's a free one. Hey, everyone, go buy some coffee from Brian, Dan's brother at Summit Coffee. How about that?
Love it.
Hey, so one of the reasons I've been excited about this conversation is because you're really in the catbird seat when it comes to taking the pulse of the enterprise. And here we are talking about AI and the future of work. Would love to get your perspective on what are enterprise leaders talking about when it comes to AI? What do they expect? How are they measuring the value? Are they apprehensive? Are they enthusiastic? What are you hearing?
It's such a fun time. And look, we decided, first of all, I mean, I'll give you my opinion, but we decided, as you have, Dan, that there's an absence of real data in this conversation. And so we've started to do a quarterly survey that's trying to watch the trends of CEO and C-level sentiment and activity around AI. And what the data tells us, and we're talking about 3,000 or so executives across every continent in the world, and it's telling us some pretty interesting things. It's telling us that 98% of people are making real major investments in the space, and that matches what you're experiencing and hearing. It matches why you have a community that's growing as fast as your community is. It's saying that 42% of that group is saying productivity, cost, efficiency are the most important benefits that they're both seeking and achieving. So that matches what we're hearing, that there's a cost play. More than half, though, are saying, I am expecting that these investments are going to yield innovation, that they're going to yield enhanced customer relationships, etc. And on those, the jury's still out on ROI. And one of the pieces of data I think is most interesting, and I'm really going to be interested in seeing it evolve over time, is that 70% of the respondents said that only about a quarter of their Gen AI experiments, proofs of concepts, MVPs, whatever you want to say, that they felt comfortable moving into production. And so what that tells us, Dan, is that there's a big gap between intent and belief, and the translation of that intent and belief into major capital investment and confident business case return. And that's where the most interesting decisions and discussions are going to happen in the coming years. I think the last thing, and no doubt your listeners, the savviest of your listeners, spend time on this, is a lot of people doing regulatory scenario analysis because data privacy issues are being hotly debated in continental and national legislatures all over the place. And so you have strategy teams at all our clients and all our industries trying to do cost benefit analysis tied to future scenarios of what regulation might look like. And things like the EU AI Act have driven some of that. That's led to a little bit of paralysis right now.
So if you read the headlines, believe it or not, everything seems very polarized. It becomes binary with regard to attitudes toward AI. You're either an AI optimist or a pessimist, and you think it's either going to kill us all or save us all. And a lot of the dialogue in this show is about unpacking those complicated relationships that we have with AI. We'd love to get your perspective on, not just at a high level, obviously there's good reasons why everyone should be thinking about and potentially investing in AI. What are the concerns that your clients have about AI?
Concerns, if you go back to the fun fact that your listeners heard at the beginning of this podcast, the concerns are about trust. And organizations that have failed to create long-term lasting relationships based on trust with their customers, whether those are B2C organizations or B2B customers, AI adds another level of anxiety and concern and potential for mistrust into the equation. And so that becomes the risk centerpiece of a lot of these conversations and concerns. So that's the first one. And the second one, if you're in the CFO's office, and as a Deloitte leader, I spend a lot of time with CFOs, you're having real conversations about uncertainty and return horizon. And a lot of the AI initiatives require significant investments up front in compute, in various enabling technology. And CFOs don't like uncertain return horizons as a general rule. And because we're at the early stage of a Gen AI wave, the clear part is the cost at the front end. The less clear part is the pace at which return will come from that. And that's the other concern or risk that I run into in the C-suite every week.
I'm going to go on a limb and say every Deloitte Consulting project involves some component of AI, and every AI first project is dependent on clients' data. And a few of the key concerns that are top of mind for leaders are, if you, Deloitte, are going to have access to my data, what's your perspective on how you're going to exercise AI responsibly in a way that bias doesn't seep into the automated decisions, and it's not going to infringe on my IP, and really is what you're developing likely to lead to job elimination? I think these are all the things that create a bunch of apprehension, and your clients are looking to you for some guidance. What is Deloitte's position on how to have the responsible AI conversation?
Yeah, you nailed it. This is the center of what we spend so much of our time on. First thing is, and it's not the attractive, fun part of this, but when you talk about data and data living inside LLMs and Gen AI models, first thing you got to make sure is that the data is of high quality. And the reality is, in many of our clients' environments, the data isn't super clean. And so a lot of the activity right now, even before you can get to the real manifestation of responsible AI, is you got to make sure the data is of high quality. And so we're doing a lot of work right now, as you'd suspect, on making sure that the data is in an environment that's clean and is of high quality. But fundamentally, and I remember making the decision, gosh, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, that we needed a trustworthy AI institute. And this is six years ago, before AI was the topic of almost every conversation you were in, and before you had a 1 million plus user, community. Trustworthy AI was not a, big headline topic. And the reason I felt like we needed to start that institute, and we ended up hiring a woman who's a real leader in the field, Bina Amanath, to lead it for us, is it was clear that trustworthy AI is our responsibility. And if we can help innovate and lead the conversation in the environment overall, then we'll be doing a good service for the world, and our clients will trust us. And so we have this trustworthy AI framework, which people can read about if they want to, but there's really 6 dimensions through which we ask ourselves and our clients to evaluate AI behavior. Transparency and explainability is 1, fairness and impartiality is 2, robustness and reliability is 3, safety and security is 4, responsibility and which is 5, which is sort of about the humans at the back end, and then respect for privacy is the 6th. And we believe that if you apply in your AI initiatives those 6 dimensions and make sure you're on the high end of the maturity model of all 6 of those, then you can hit the I believe button that what you're doing, and if we're involved, what we're helping you do is going to pass the most stringent of trustworthy or responsible AI tests.
That's a much more mature framework than I've heard. We've interviewed probably over 100 guests on this show and had similar conversations. It's a really mature framework for where we're currently at. I'm sure that goes a long way toward building trust with your clients.
Yeah, because having the conversation at 40,000 feet becomes tiresome and unconvincing over time. It's sort of an interesting high-level conversation to have 2 years ago. Now we're talking about real data, real people's lives, real concerns, and real opportunities, and that deserves a framework with rigor and repeatability.
Let's go from that higher level down to, say, C level, SEA level, that is. In our business at PeopleRain, we're responsible for data and decisions that can certainly impact lives. And one of the things that we've had to do or we've wanted to do, we enthusiastically do to build trust with our customers is we'll indemnify them against any harm that's caused by PeopleRain. I know your vantage point and the projects you do, have a different relationship with data and automated decisions, but I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on who's responsible if the client says, a project owned by Deloitte had this adverse impact. It's so easy for everyone in the process to claim plausible deniability. What's your perspective on it as the CEO of the org?
My belief as the CEO of the org is that anytime we sign a contract with a client, we're committing to deliver the outcomes that contract asked for. And that's a sacred connection and responsibility that we have. Now, the nature of, you use the expression a Deloitte-owned project or a Deloitte-owned activity, rarely is the actual usage of AI in the context of one of our clients as simple as Deloitte owned. In fact, in the vast majority of situations, we're talking about client-owned activities that we're supporting in some way. The answer is we take ultimate and sincere responsibility, but the field of contract law and other law that surrounds these AI relationships is a field that is going to continue to evolve, over the course of the months and years to come.
So let's take the example you shared earlier, the fan experience. And as a big sports fan, I celebrate the fact that I want to go into a venue, whether it's the Olympics or the WNBA. I know that's another one of Deloitte's kind of high-profile clients. But so let's say I go to an NBA game. I want to benefit from, easy digital payments and, location-based discounts when I'm near the snack bar and a personalized stream of highlights that interest me and, insights based on, 3-point shooting percentage and things like that. And I, as a fan, may not be aware of the data that's being used, the potential impact of what I'm giving up in exchange for that fantastic experience. As owners of these systems, what obligation do we have to be overly, or how do we communicate how the data is used, what data is being used in exchange for those experiences that we want?
We think you have a lot of responsibility to provide that transparency. And so if we go back to the 6 elements of the AI framework, Dan, the first one's transparency and explainability. And much of that transparency is about the relationship between, in a high-functioning AI system and a trusting relationship between a company or organization and its customers, is about transparency in that process. And so there is tons of beauty and I think you described a personalized fan experience in a basketball arena extremely well. And the personalization that comes from that relationship is incredibly powerful. But the only way that becomes a permanent relationship between the organization and the customer is that that transparency is built in the upfront definition of the relationship when someone is creating a profile, when someone is engaging. We think it's imperative that you are proactive versus reactive in establishing the transparent ways in which you're going to use their data and create the offers and propositions that are going to be put in front of them.
We work so hard to build trust, and yet it's so easy to violate it. And so I think we're always trying to do the right thing, but it's a complicated relationship that we have with the end customer. But I think with the advent of ubiquitous AI, it's forcing us all to confront, what is it that we owe, to the customers whose trust we're trying to build.
I think that's right. I also think that if you follow the approach we've just talked about, then you build that trust over time, and then you actually buy yourselves the ability to navigate a slip up here or there. Nothing of grand scale, but just like in our personal relationships, and just like in the relationships we've had pre-AI with companies that provide goods or services to us, you can build a relationship over time that allows you to stub your toe here or there and still, in the fullness of time, preserve trust.
So you do this series that I feel like I got to know you putting together this show called Everyday Equations. Some of your management philosophies and things you've learned. Could you maybe share with our audience an everyday equation that comes to mind, and maybe also just a little bit of the genesis of that series?
Yeah, it's been fun, and it's fun to get reaction from around the world of something you think about leadership-wise, because it's created a lot of fun conversations. The genesis of Everyday Equations is to say platitudes about what organizations care about or what their vision is or what their values are interesting, but they often their team members have a really hard time translating that into choices they make every day. And so what we call these equations are things where we say something is greater than something else. And the reason we frame it that way is that we say, therefore, on an everyday basis, when you're a Deloitte employee and you're working with your clients, you know that we want you to prioritize X over Y. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. So we have an everyday equation that says 15-minute huddles are greater than 30-minute meetings. Okay, what does that mean? That means that we're trying to communicate that we're contrasting 15 versus 30. So we're trying to change the default of a meeting from 30 minutes to 15 because we're saying we think we are at risk of wasting a bunch of time. And so we're telling you that. And huddle versus meeting is trying to say, stop some of the formality, particularly when we're talking to ourselves. And so you're communicating this really clear leadership philosophy in a way that people remember. And then another one that's bigger picture and has probably been the most powerful over the last 5 years for me is your well-being is greater than Deloitte's well-being. What does that mean? That means if on an everyday basis, if you're making a choice, some fundamental choice that you think you have to choose to do something that's going to be better for Deloitte or better for your well-being, I always want you to choose yourself. And by yourself, it typically means your family, etc. Because what we've learned is that trust and loyalty over time accrues from people feeling confident to make choices that sustain and propel their own well-being. And that's been a pretty powerful way to help people have the confidence to say, you know what? I think I need to make this choice for me, even though I know it's going to have a non-ideal impact in the short term for Deloitte. So those are two examples, and we continue to iterate on them as the world changes.
I don't think there are many leaders of 80,000 plus person organizations that would say something like that. I think Maybe some cultures will whisper it, a full-throated statement like that from the CEO, that says a lot. And I know that's the culture that you've created, and that's the value you live by. Thanks for sharing that. Hey, Dan, unbelievably, we're about out of time. But gosh, I'm not letting you off the hot seat without answering one last important question for me. We're both lifelong soccer fans, soccer players. What's one life lesson that you've learned on the pitch?
Captain is greater than coach. And what I mean by that is I live my life wanting to earn respect from my peers, not earn respect based on authority. And look, I was the captain of almost every team I've ever been a part of. And some of those teams I was, quote, the best player. And some of them I hardly saw the pitch or the field. But in all cases, I realized that I could make a ton of impact in the fabric of the team through creating an inclusive environment, through making sure everybody felt part of the team, through swallowing my own frustration about how I might have been treated by a coach or a different teammate. And look, those lessons have been incredibly powerful long past my playing days.
There's a reason they call it the beautiful game, right? I need a little prognostication. So what's the likelihood that your Hoyas meet my Stanford Cardinal in the NCAA men's final this year?
I think there's a 50% chance that at least one of the two teams is in the Final Four. And the last time the Cardinal and the Hoyas played, the Cardinal got the better of the Hoyas. However, the last time they played in a national Final Four, the Hoyas got the better of the Cardinals. So we'll see. But I will be in the broadcast booth when that game happens. I'll look forward to you tuning in and watching.
I won't just tune in. I'll be there. I'm going to come shake your hand and say, may the best team win. Dan, this has been an absolute pleasure. Before we can wrap up, where can the audience learn more about you and the great work that your team's doing?
Hey, anybody can give me a follow on LinkedIn or Twitter at dhelfrich21. And all the stuff we're doing at Deloitte's on Deloitte.com, including some stuff about trustworthy AI. And I always love talking to people who are trying to think about how technology can change the future in a thoughtful way. And I know that's what your community is focused on. So cheers. And it's been a ton of fun, Dan.
Hey, we're all rooting for you and the team to succeed. You're doing great work. Thanks for hanging out.
Cheers.
You've got an open invite. Whenever you want to come back and talk men's college soccer, we'll hang out again.
All right.
Good
Thanks,
stuff.
Dan.
You bet. Gosh, that's all the time that we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Rain. And of course, we're back next week with another amazing guest.